the main character in my series. She's a research librarian at Harvard's Widener Library. And she finds missing people on the side. In the first book, she winds up finding a serial killer. And in that book, there was a character that sort of evolved in the last third of the book. I mean, there were dead bodies popping up all over the place, so the cops sort of had to get involved. So I brought in a character called Angela White, who's a detective with the Boston Police Department. And she came in to investigate. And one of the fun things about writing a series is that you get to listen to your readers and figure out what they like about various things that you can do. And you can kind of respond to them. And one of the characters that really popped in that book, even though she was only in the last third, was that character, Angela White. So I brought her back in the second. They definitely had sort of established a friendship by the end of the first book, but I brought her back in a larger role in the second book. And then in the third book, which is publishing in December, she's a major, major character. All of my books are always told in multiple points of view. They usually have four different point of view characters. And in this coming up book, Angela takes one of those point of views.
Interesting. You know, what do you guys think are the main differences between writing a story with a cop in the lead role and a PI in the lead role? And maybe we'll just start with you again, Matt.
Well, I think for one thing, for the author, it's a lot more research if you're writing a cop in the role, because you want to get things right. And the easier thing about writing detective work, although my guy and many were cops at one point, they're investigating, but there's no rigid standards that they have to follow and that you have to follow and you have to know. I think another thing is mostly in police procedurals, you're not in first person, you're in third person, close third person sometimes, mostly. I'm sure there's exceptions. And in the PI, a lot of PI novels, myself included, write in first person. So you're closer to the motivations of the character. But honestly, I thought when I first started writing a million years ago, I thought about writing police procedurals. Of course, I rather read PI novels all my life, starting with Raymond Chandler, so I had that kind of built-in sense. But I just realized it's a lot of work. I mean, if you get something wrong, I mean, as everybody knows, you get something wrong with a gun, you're going to hear about it. But there's so many opportunities to get something wrong writing as a police officer. I stuck with PIs. Lazy.
How about you, Mary?
Can you ask the question again?
Sure. What do you think are the main differences between writing a story with a cop in the lead role or a PI in the lead role?
Okay, I was still listening to Matt, every word here. I kind of lost the question there for a second, but I really don't have a lot to add to what Matt was saying. I mean, there are some main differences. I mean, that you have to be, you're really guided by the law as a police officer, a good police officer, and a PI can skirt the law just a little bit and has a little more room to fudge. And I think that's why I personally chose PI, because I liked being able to have that choice to, pick that lock perhaps, or go into a situation that would get a cop into trouble. So, I still think that a PI needs to rely on the law, of course, and know their limits, but that's the main difference, I think, just being able to have that choice a little bit more.
Okay, Alan, anything?
Copy and paste what she said over my answer, okay? Copy and paste that.
Well, I agree with both Mary and Matt to a large extent. I mean, Matt touched on it on his answer to the previous question, that my PI and many PIs operate under their own moral code, and they're after justice, which doesn't always coincide exactly with the law. So by having a PI, your PI can rough somebody up if he deserves it. As Mary said, you can pick a lock if you really need to get in there and you can't get a warrant for some reason. So it gives kind of the author, it gives us writers sort of leeway to pursue how we wish the system could be rather than maybe how it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Copy paste again.
Yeah, these are all good. There's a common theme through all of these. Edwin, anything that you have to add to that? I mean, you're the only one.
Poor Edwin has to go last after us.
Yeah, yeah. You,
I would just echo what Matt said. It really helps. You don't have to worry about getting all of the law right. It was interesting writing my third book because I did have a more procedure in it than I had had in the prior ones. And I do have I consult with a police officer who's very helpful. But it is, it's more nerve-wracking when you're dealing with someone's actual job.
Yeah. When you read some of the PI novels, the police and the PIs are adversaries. Sometimes the cops are depicted as seeing the PIs as being a nuisance. Other times it's much more extreme, like things have escalated to the point where there's a warrant out for the PI's arrest. Sometimes PIs are depicted as white knights who represent justice when the system fails. But for whatever reason, the police and the legal system have been unable to find or punish the guilty. So the PI has been hired to set things right. But there seems to be this tug and pull between the law enforcement officers and the PIs. What do you think of the relationship of PIs and law enforcement in books? And this time, let's just pick our own order. Anybody who wants to go forward with this, just go ahead and take it. The relationship between PIs and law enforcement in books. Is it realistic? Is it stretched? Or what do you think?
I don't know if it's realistic, but I get a little irked when I always see that the FBI comes into the local jurisdiction's case and tries to Bigfoot it, and they're always, at odds and arguing, and the Phoebes don't know what they're doing. These local yokels, they don't know what they're doing. So that kind of irks me. I don't know whether it's true to life in that way. I mean, the few law enforcement people I've talked to, I never sort of get that impression that that's the way it is. In my particular book, I picked a stalking case. So I was able to sort of keep the police, they've evaluated it and given the victim sort of the standard, well, this is what you can do, and until it escalates, there's nothing more we can do. So then it's logically shifted to the PIs to handle the case.
I mean, I would say, like in my series, if my series were realistic, like really realistic, Hester Thursby would be profiled by the FBI at this point. She's been involved with so many crimes. You do have to suspend your disbelief a little bit when it comes to any of these PI, anyone who's sort of inserting themselves into crime on a regular basis. But I think it really serves. It depends on what the needs of the story are. If you need that tension between your PI or your investigator and the police, then it serves you to mine that tension. If you need a partnership between the two of them, it serves you to mine that partnership. I mean, I will say that Angela and Hester's relationship is a friendly one. They hang out, they watch ball games together, but there's also some moral ambiguity in my stories, and that plays a role in the evolution of their relationship as well.
Mary? You want to jump in, Mary, or are you going to let me Bigfoot it again?
Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I think that I think in real life, it's probably between PIs and cops. There's probably a lot less antagonism than we all write about, and I think they're just less bumping up against each other. Like for murder investigations, you're very rarely going to have a PI even investigate that much, although a little bit. But what I try to do, because I have the built-in tension, I think it's great to have the built-in tension. What I try to do is have each. Of course, I'm writing in first person, so Rick, you always know what's going on in his head. But I try to have, if the police have a problem with Rick, they have to have reasons for it. It's not just because he's this PI. They have their own goals for the particular case, and they have to have a reason to be upset that he's bumping up against them, not just because he's a PI, but because they think this and he thinks this. So I try to make it as realistic as possible. I don't try to make the cops bad guys all the time. I do have, in most of the books, Rick's dealing with the La Jolla Police Department, which I mentioned earlier is fictional, because I wanted to have a small police force where there is greater opportunity for corruption to take hold and not to have civilian oversight. But even then, with the corrupt cops, I tried to have them have, they have their own reasons for, like every, not that the cops are always the bad guys, but every bad guy in a story thinks he's the hero. That's the old saying. But I just try to make it, try to make it as realistic as possible why they don't like this particular guy and why they bump up, or it just becomes a trope, kind of a needless trope, which maybe it is.
Yeah, I was going to say, like in my stories, I try to make the cops not the bad guy either. But I definitely make that love interest as almost a bumper down a bowling lane, right? Kind of keeping her into the center. But the conflict definitely can be there, especially, when you are talking about if the cops think they're doing something wrong, or if the PI is implying that the cops aren't doing their job. I think that is kind of where the conflict is set in my novels. Is the cop being looked at as not having done enough? And I think that alone creates the conflicts on some level. But I try to always show the police in a good light because Kelly's got a love interest, and and I have relatives that are in the law enforcement, and I don't want to get into trouble. so there's a bunch of reasons. But yeah.
You talk about relatives in law enforcement. The people who are in law enforcement, they have to follow a lot of rules. Things like evidence collection and the chain of custody and the rights of witnesses. You think a PI should ever be concerned with whether evidence is admissible or not, or concerned about the chain of custody, or any of those kinds of limitations that the police have?
I think if it makes sense for the story, I mean, there are times when the PI is investigating, and if he does come across evidence that he's trying to, generally he's investigating on behalf of somebody, and generally it's because they're thought to be guilty in some ways. So if he comes across new evidence, yeah, I was just writing about chain of custody, as a matter of fact, where that is something that they do need to be concerned about when they're just trying to figure out their own, solve their own cases. They don't, chain of custody, what's that? I just evidence. A lot of it is what I found, and the rest of it is what I think for my guy. But yeah, I think there are times when you do have to be concerned about chain of custody for a PI, but not that much with my guy.
I've never worried about chain of custody.
You better now.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, well, I think, like in my books, or at the end of one of my novels, that same question actually comes up, because, if my PI removes the evidence, it weakens the case against the person that is the guilty party. So, she has a dilemma at the end, and I like that kind of moral dilemma. Do I take this now or do I ruin the case by taking it from this place at this moment, or do I call the police in at this moment? And so I think there has to be some thought, depending on what the case is that they're investigating, as to whether it's going to the criminal get off scot-free if she does it or doesn't do it, and that. So.
We just had a good message from Lori, a PI in the audience, who said, yes, chain of custody is very important because she's generally working for a lawyer on a case. And of course, that's all very important.
Oh, good point. Glad that that was added to the discussion. Are there characteristics that cops in novels have, their personalities, their skills, their motivations, that are different from the PIs in novels? For example, would cops like Michael Connelly's Harry Bosch or Ian Rankin's John Rebus be effective as PIs? Or would PIs like Elvis Cole in Robert Cray's books, or Kinsey Milhone by Sue Grafton, would they make it as cops? Can you take someone who's written a cop and put him into a PI role? Can you take a PI and put him into the cop role, and would it work?
I think Kinsey was a cop, if I remember correctly. And so I do feel like that's one of those things that they do a lot that many people do, is you'll take a cop someone who was a cop and make them a PI, which is, I think, an interesting transition. And it touches on some of the things that we're talking about here. You want a PI who, maybe doesn't want to follow all of the rules, and they would have been hemmed in by some of those rules as a cop.
Right.
I think I cut you off, Alan, though. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I was going to say, in the fictional world, I think it's a one-way street. I think that the cops can go to they get fed up with the bureaucracy or following the rules, or they caught a killer and he's been released on some technicality. They just get frustrated and go to the private side where they can, handle justice in their own way. So but to see Elvis Coyle join the force, I don't see that.
I see a PI as really being a maverick, and wants to buck authority on some level, doesn't like the rules and regulations, or at least doesn't want to have to answer to somebody or a whole bureaucracy over them. So I see them as very different type of personalities in some ways.
Copy paste all.
Yeah, me too. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any humorous novels that feature a police investigator. Well, I can think of Detective Columbo on TV, for example.
Lots of cozies will have a detective as part of the storyline. Often as a sidekick to the main character, whoever that is.
Any other thoughts about humor in cop stories versus humor in PI or related stories?
I mean, I always try to infuse some humor into my novels. Whether it's successful or not is up to my readers.
Mine is dark, and I do try to have a little light moment every now and then, but it's somewhat self-deprecating for Rick Cahill at times. But yeah, a little bit of humor or his relationship with Moira, his kind of partner at times.
Alan, you wrote a book that featured a humorist in it, or actually a series, isn't that right?
I wrote 2 books that featured a stand-up comic as the protagonist, because don't all stand-up comics solve murders? I mean, really? And it was a lot of fun, but here's the thing. It wasn't intended to be super funny. I just wanted to explore that line that a lot of these comics have between the dark side and the humorous side. So I sort of took my inspiration from Richard Pryor and Sam Kinison, more so than Jerry Seinfeld, for instance.
I'm working on a comedy novel, a novel set in the comedy world right now. I'll have to compare notes.
Fun. What can a PI do that a police investigator can't?
Well, he can get physical. That's something a police officer can, but aren't supposed to. He can withhold evidence. He can hide evidence. He can
plan evidence.
Sometimes instill his own justice with very severe violence. In the cozies that happens, but not in stuff I write.
I mean, I would say, for me, my novels are really about curiosity, and I think one of the places where I'm freed up because my main character is an amateur sleuth is that she's able to just be curious about things that she's observing in the world, and then go out and figure out why those things are happening, and they just happen to often lead to crime. I don't know if it's different when it's your job and you're going to work and you're investigating the things that are assigned to you or the things that happen around you.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say cut and paste for Matt and Edwin. Yeah, that all sounds about right.
Agreed.
Yeah, in the current climate, a lot of people are talking about defunding the police, and in other ways, people are looking at the police departments in ways that's different or more extreme than has occurred in the past. How would that affect you as if you were to be writing a story about a police detective, or even in your own PI novels, if you're interfacing with the police?
Well, I'll say that I think this conversation that's happening opens up all sorts of avenues that you could explore as a writer. I mean, just listening to the town hall last night and what I listened to the one that Joe Biden was doing, talking about incorporating more social work into police work. I think that's a really exciting thing to explore as a writer, and there are these new avenues. And gosh, that's a whole set of new characters that we can explore within this. Now we have a triangle: a social worker, a PI, and a police detective, and that opens up all sorts of different possibility. You just kind of gave me an idea. Thank you.
I call dibs. Dibs.
I have another timely question. With this pandemic that we have going on right now, people are wearing masks, we're social distancing, and if you're writing a novel that's set in the present day, how are you going to handle that, or how are you handling it, or are you trying to avoid it altogether?
The conundrum of our time right now as a writer, and I write forward, like I write for when the book comes out. So the book I'm finishing now will come out in 2021 in December, I think, around there. So, I of course I didn't know about it when I was finishing the last book at the end of December of 19. So there's nothing of it in this book. And then I foolishly probably hope it'll be gone by 2021 and not deal with it, because I've ignored it. I don't really. It's not something that I want to get into. But I think that I'll feel pretty stupid in 5 years if I don't have any books with masks and we're still wearing them in 2026.
The first line of my works in progress now says set in 2019.
Huh.
For the next 5 books.
Let me write that down.
I finished the book that's coming out at the end of December. I finished I sent it off to my publisher in February of this year, 2020. Then of course the whole world ended in March of 20, or didn't end, but that was,
Right.
But everything changed in March of that year. And so I was working on my copy edits, and it's the novel set at a college. So it's like, it's very, college is something that's been highly impacted by everything that's going on here. And so I was trying to work on it in my copy edits, and finally I just decided that I actually wanted a world where students went to college and there were parties and there were past hors d'oeuvres and all of that stuff. So for this novel, I did wind up just leaving it. If you read it, you'll notice that nobody shakes hands in the book. I tried to take out anything that would seem very, very, very would seem like it was being highlighted, like kissing on the cheek or shaking hands or anything like that, just because I feel like within fiction right now, we notice things like that. For the book I finished another book, and I did incorporate the pandemic a little bit, and I'm working on another book right now that I don't want to give away all my tricks, but I am trying to incorporate the pandemic into it.
Yeah, for my book that's coming out in May 2021, I just finished line edits on, and I'm not being asked to go back and add anything. So I think I'm just going to live in the optimistic world that we're done by May of 2021. 2022, the third book in this series, I may have to actually go in but I'm going to do it in like during that small amount of time where we had to wear masks. I'm going to still remain optimistic as long as I can in the writing. So I like a world without masks, but
Right,
who knows?
Except with the burglars. I just saw a text that ran across the screen and said that that particular author is going to start writing historical stories, historical mysteries. I think I'm going to set mine way in the future. So, are there reasons why? I'm sure there are reasons why. How did you go about choosing your particular investigator? What was it? Why were you attracted to creating the investigator who is in your books? They're all unique, they're all interesting, and they are 5 very different people. Maybe you could just, explain how you created those investigating characters? And maybe we'll start, Alan, alphabetically.
Okay. I was working in Boston, and I was like in my 20s, and my boss came up to me and said, "Alan, do you like to read?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And there's this great series about a Boston PI. His name is Spencer. I'm like, "Oh, all right, I'll check it out." So I read the first one, and I was totally hooked. And I've written my 10th book comes out next July. This is my first PI book, this 9th book that just came out in March, February. But all the previous 8 books, in my head, they were all starring Spencer. They have different names, they have different ages, but it all follows that same prototypical PI, the same kind of tropes, the same devices. So in my head, I've been writing PI novels for a while. That's sort of how the main character got developed. But in my book, Anderson West has hired his sister to work with him at the firm. And his sister is anything but traditional. She's off the wall, no rules. And I thought it would be interesting juxtaposition, easy for me to say, between sort of the straight-laced, typical PI and this loose cannon sister. So that's sort of how I develop my characters.
And Edwin, you feature a research librarian. How did you come up with that?
My first novel is called Little Comfort, and it came out of this story from about 10 years ago about this guy named Clark Rockefeller, who was pretending to be a member of the Rockefeller clan. And of course he wasn't, and he had married this very wealthy woman, and his story started to unravel, and he went on the run with his child. So I started to write a story. I wanted it to be about a person like Clark Rockefeller. And as I was drafting, it was my first novel, as I was drafting it, I realized I needed a foil for that antagonist. I had meant for him to be sort of the central character in the story, and it just didn't work. And so once I decided I needed a foil, I just kind of, there's this exercise called what if, where you just say, what if, and you start filling in the sentence, and you fill it in until you get to the right answer. And so ultimately, I threw many what if exercises. This was not a short process. I ultimately landed on Hester Thursby. I wanted someone who would be very curious, someone who would ask questions. And so that's how I really landed in on being a librarian. And I also wanted the character to have access to information that the average person, not only that the average person wouldn't necessarily have, but that she would be someone who would know how to access that information. And so that's how I landed on a research librarian. I live in Boston. At the time I lived in Somerville, and Harvard, Harvard's a very interesting place. And Widener Library is the largest and one of the oldest libraries in the country. So I thought, why not set it there? And I am glad I made those decisions.
Matt, what about you? How did you create Rick?
As I said earlier, I've read PI novels my whole life, so there was that DNA in there. But as I was writing the first draft of the first book a million years ago, it was very autobiographical, and I haven't had a very exciting life. It was light, much lighter than I didn't know at the time that I wanted it to be. And after revising and going through, I don't know where I was, maybe the first revision, somewhere along the line, a sentence popped into my head, which became the first sentence to Yesterday's Echo, which was, the first time I saw her, she made me remember and she made me forget. And when, that came from the subconscious. My subconscious is a much better writer than my conscious. But when that hit, I realized, well, this guy, there's been a lot of pain in this guy's life, a lot more than I've been writing. And he really had a need to find joy. And so from there, his backstory completely changed for me and got a lot darker. And with each book, he's gotten darker, and I learned more about him. So it was in my DPI, but something I couldn't reach told me it had to be darker, and that's where I went.
Mary?
Yeah, so, I think Kelly was kind of formed out of just my place as a writer. I had always read PI novels. I'm a huge Sue Grafton fan. But when I created Kelly, it was my first PI novel that I was writing, and I wanted her to be a new PI. So she grew up in the industry next to her dad, but she'd never really been a PI out in the world doing PI things, more like process serving. So I kind of used where I was as a writer to kind of place her as a beginner PI. And we were kind of going to learn this whole journey together. So as she investigates, she makes some mistakes. And I think that that's just worked really well for me as a writer, as I'm learning to write into the PI novel genre. And so that's why I chose her, not to be too savvy, too experienced, because that's kind of where I was. And I wrote her in 1999, so I was a different person as well, a little bit of time back. So that's why I chose her in this beginning place. And she's going to continue to grow through the series, just like I'm growing as a writer. So
I think Mary makes a good point, is that I think hopefully a lot of private eyes fictionally make mistakes. That's always a potential for bad consequences. And sometimes readers get really upset that your PI did something stupid, but they're not Supermen. I don't write a Superman. He doesn't have a Superman sidekick. Yeah. He's got to deal with the own messes he makes, and I don't know. Maybe some people don't like that.
Yeah. When I was writing Double Take, the first of the Hank Hammond series featuring Lori Reed, I thought about when I was working in the retail industry, and I used to supervise a staff of loss prevention officers and store detectives. And a lot of those were wannabe cops or wannabe PIs. Not all of them. Some were absolutely fantastic, but others had this certain mindset that they wanted to be more than they really were. So I patterned Hank after one of those guys, had him open up his own PI agency, not be particularly good at it, and need to enlist the help of the office manager who managed the lawyer's office that he rented space from. They're two people who are completely different, totally different personalities and skill sets. And between the two of them, they're able to solve the crime. And with the woman, Lori, who's the office manager, she was really patterned on after somebody I saw every day of my life for a few years. She was the administrative assistant to this EVP of operations, had the office next to mine. And that guy couldn't get anything done without her keeping him organized, keeping him on track, feeding him information, and keeping people away from him. So it was kind of combining those two people and creating a story with two people. So we all come from different places in creating these characters.
Right.
Let's do like a lightning round thing. One word or two-word answer. Who's your favorite PI in a book or favorite cop in a book? And let's just go, this is for what? Whoever gets it right wins a new car. I don't know. Let's start with Alan. Favorite PI or cop in a book?
I already said Spencer, so I'll stick with that.
Okay. Matt, I think I know who you're going to say.
Philip Marlowe.
Philip Marlowe. Mary?
Kinsey Milhone, of course, for PI. Bosch for a detective.
Boy, me too. Edwin?
I love all of these answers. I like Jackson Brody from Kate Atkinson's series.
Okay. Are there any questions that you would have liked for me to have asked, but that I haven't asked the panel yet? Because we've got a few more minutes before we open it up to questions that come from the audience.
Not that I can think
You did a
of.
fine job.
Any answers that you wanted to give, but I didn't give you the questions.
I don't know if it's getting easier or harder for everybody writing on the panel.
Easier, harder? Good question.
I'm in the middle of my first draft right now, so it's nothing but hard.
Nothing but difficult.
Hopefully it'll be easier in a few weeks.
Yeah.
I think the story, coming up with the storyline, the plot is harder, but the prose is easier.
There's something to that.
I don't think it ever has gotten easier yet for me. I'm looking forward
Right
to that
answer.
day. I struggle every step of the way.
Figure by now it would have gotten easier, but I'm amazed. Like, man, you're not really retaining enough. You should be better at this.
It's easier to have written than to write, isn't it?
Yes.
It's the best thing.
Yeah.
It's the best
Yeah.
thing.
Someone asked if we're a pantser or a plotter. I will take that one. So I've written. I'm on my 5th novel right now. I have 2 out, but I've written 5 novels, and I've actually every single one I've taken a different stance on that question. So right now I'm a total pantser, and I wish I was a plotter. My last book I was a total plotter, and I wished I was a pantser. So I don't know. It just depends on what comes to me that day.
Yeah, I think that's funny. You should. It works that way for you because I thought that once you figured it out, you figured it out. But I don't have a set way either. I mean, I'm much more pantser than anything close to plotter. But with each new book, I become less plotter and less organized. I call it organic, which means I don't know what I'm doing anymore. But I figure I've done it before. Just keep moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
I used to be a plotter, but now I'm somewhat of a pantser, so I'm really a plotzer.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to write the last chapter so I know which direction I'm heading, but because usually I see it in my mind like a movie, so I can see that last scene and how I want it to tie. But I'm team pantser all the way. I just I think the best with my fingers moving on the computer, and that's how I work.
How often does that last chapter change? Significantly.
Significantly, yeah, quite often. But at least I have kind of a general direction. Right. Usually I never know who's going to actually have done the crime. That changes several times sometimes.
I think it does help to have a target, whether it ends up being the same when you get there.
Yeah, it does.
Anyone in the audience is welcome to type out a question and send it in. We have quite a few that have come in already, but I'm going to start going through those and taking a look. One of them came up from online and this is addressed to all of you, and that is there any subject you would not write about? Boy, that's a pretty open one.
It is an interesting question because we're writing about murdering people, and yet I do, which is art like automatically distasteful. But there are certain things that there are certain things that like I just could like I couldn't go there. I mean, I never feature animal cruelty in my novels, which I think is I don't think many people do. But I don't know if I can put my finger on them, but there are certain places that I just don't want to go as a writer. You sit with a manuscript for a very long time. You have to sit with the decisions that you've made. And if you write a series, whatever, those decisions kind of stay with you even beyond that one book, or they can. And so just knowing that about yourself and knowing what those places that you don't want to go, I think that's important as a writer.
Well, I wrote a book about cannibals, so I'm probably not the right one to ask.
I don't think that I don't really think there's anything I wouldn't write about, but it's just a matter of what detail you get into in terms of some really hideous crimes. But my goal is always, well, how does this affect as I'm the protagonist I'm writing now, how does it affect him in his life? How does it help him overcome or deal with obstacles? So that's my main goal. But if it was something really, I mean, I guess I've written about some pretty bad stuff. I just don't go into wouldn't go into much detail, but try to feel the resonance of the pain.
I think for me, the crime has to have some sort of reason. So I guess I would steer away from serial killing simply because there's not a real reason. Evil doesn't work for me. There has to be a reason for the crime that makes some sense, whether it's a crime of passion or whatever. So senseless crime is probably not a direction I would go, because like Edwin said, you sit with it for a long time and you have to reread. And of course, to get published, you're reading that thing 20, 30 times probably. And I don't want to have to be afraid when I go to sleep at night. So I want to be able to close my eyes. So, and of course, no animals will ever die in my novels, ever. So, you know, those would be the other thing. So.
You talk about being able to go to sleep at night. I have to confess that last night I started reading a book by one of you, and I didn't get enough sleep last night. It was really good. And those of you in the audience, I suggest that you buy a book from each one of these people so you can figure out which one it was that kept me up last night.
Well, thanks, and I apologize for you not getting any sleep.
I'm going to keep a straight face so I don't give any clues. One of the questions just came in was, did any of you research or talk with real PIs?
I haven't talked to, well, actually, I have talked to a real PI, as a matter of fact. We're kind of hard to get a hold of. Cops are always really forthcoming with information.
Yeah.
I was trying to track down this one PI in particular because he was working in an area that my guy would work in, and never returned an email or anything or a phone call. But I have talked to, by accident at a conference, I talked to a couple PIs, but I don't think I had any good questions at the time. But I think I do have the one guy's email address. He's giving me some stuff.
Okay.
I've talked to many librarians about what their day-to-day life is like, and sort of showed them some ideas, and that's been very helpful. And I you know, like MWA and Sisters in Crime, they'll do lots of things with PIs that you can, you know, here and there that you can look for as far as training goes. And I do try to attend those because it is kind of interesting, especially around technology. You don't necessarily know what technology is available to today's private investigators, especially as things evolve on a day-by-day basis.
Yeah, so I spent 18 years working in law, and so one of my jobs was actually being able to interact with a couple of the PIs that helped in our insurance defense law firm at the time. So I actually got to pick their brain a little bit before I ever started the series. So.
Yeah, like Edwin, I've been to events where there's PIs around, or you know, I took up a Citizens Police Academy to get it from the other side. For the record, I've never talked to any cannibals.
That you know of.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I did read PI for Dummies about 30 years ago, so before they had the internet, probably. Don't think I use any of that right now.
Yeah, I read that too. Stephen Brown, right?
Yeah, that's right, Brown.
Yeah.
Another question from the audience. How do you write a PI that resonates with modern readers without it being a hard-boiled cliche?
I have no idea.
I try to make all of my novels very character driven. So, you know, I feel like good characters resonate with, hopefully, you know, you hope your good characters resonate with your readers. And I separate from the rest of that.
The themes of justice and fair play and so on are timeless. So I think as long as you don't have people, you know, dialing like this, their telephones with the, you know, words, I think you're probably okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No answering machine like the beginning of the Rockford Files, for example.
Hey, don't knock the Rockford Files, man.
My favorite. Yeah. Mary, I think I interrupted you.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think character is a big thing. You know, having a likable character, you know, and trying to avoid the tropes or not. I think just as long as you make them likable and have relatable issues on some levels, you know, we all want certain things the same. So focusing in on that.
I agree. My guy be thought of as hard-boiled cliche, but you hear what his thoughts are continuously, so you know the reasons for his actions. You also know that he's kind of he's soft and hard inside, as opposed to just being hard on the outside. So I think hopefully that will not be tropish.
Yeah, another question that came up. I'm curious about this one. I certainly have my opinion. It's not about writing, but it's, you know, how does being in a virtual panel like this compare to being on a live panel? What are your thoughts on this? Have anybody done this before?
Yeah. It's not as fun. You don't get the energy. You don't get the energy from the audience. No question. I mean, it's great. It brings in a lot of people. We saw, of course, sort of conferences, but we saw, we're warming up here, people coming from Hawaii or listening from Hawaii. But I mean, it gives a lot of access, but the energy is not there for me at least. I know you guys are bringing enough, but you know, we're not getting the audience, you know, smiling faces. We have Edwin smiling face, and that's it.
I totally agree. But on the bright side, we don't have to wear pants.
Yeah. You know, I think we are where we are, and this is thank you to BoucherCon for organizing this.
Right.
But you know, there are a lot of benefits to being able to do things online. I mean, Christ, I saved $1,000 by not having to come to Sacramento, which is a nice thing. And we did get to a lot of people from you know, around the world to be able to come to this. Yes, I wish I was not going to go drink my wine by myself after this. But you know, hello to everyone around the world. I'm glad that you could join us today.
I was going to say, from this introvert and first-time panelist, it's less terrifying being on Zoom. So, but I agree that it would be nice to interact, and you don't feel the energy from the audience for sure. So I look forward to that at some point, having that.
Mary, this is your first panel?
This is my first panel ever.
Wow.
You know, the tradition is you buy the rest of the panelists drinks.
Oh, well,
Right.
I would love to.
Next year.
I owe you. Yes.
You've been, wow, you're like an old pro, I have to tell you.
Rest.
Someone asked a question of you, Matt. When are you going to write your non-Rick Cahill novel?
Next, after I finish this book, as a matter of fact. Thank you, Carl. Yeah, I've written Rick for, it took me 10 years to get published. I've been writing him for 19 years, I think, in first person in this one particular character's head. So it's gonna be a whole different experience of it. We'll see what happens.
We had another question about cannibals. That seems to be something people are quite into. Cannibal stand-up comedians. What's it, cannibal?
Sorry, I brought that up.
Karen Phillips has been killing it on the chat, by the way. Whoever Karen Phillips is, you're killing it.
Yeah. What kind of cool tech tools or gadgets do your PIs use? Or do they?
Mine uses a lot of databases and searches. I try not to get too into it because it's super boring. So I'll write it in very, very, very brief descriptions of it.
Are brass knuckles high tech?
Yeah, digital brass knuckles.
My character definitely checks Facebook. Double checks it. Always looking at the social media to see, track somebody down. But that's about as gadgety as she gets.
Yeah, you definitely have to remember social media. My guy uses a ray gun, but that's all.
Mine uses a zapper, but only to reheat his pizza. What do you say? Another question from the audience. What do you say to people who say that the PI novel is dead? Is it?
Apparently not. We had 140 people in the audience.
I hope not.
No, I don't think so. I think it's that conversation's been going on for years. Early in my career when I first started writing them. No, I don't think so. I mean, if you look on the New York Times bestseller list, there's probably a PI up there every once in a while. I think there's a need for that. PIs generally help people that can't get help through law enforcement. So there's always going to be that need. That's what I say.
This is a question for Alan. It says that since you're on this panel with no pants, does that make you a pantser?
Good one. I'm wearing shorts, so I'm a short story writer.
Here's a new one. I'm new to most of you. Would each of the panelists suggest which book of theirs I should read first? That's a great question. Let's start with Matt. You have 7 in your series, is that right?
Yeah, 7 comes out. Or am I pointing the right? Blind Vigil comes out December 1st. You would generally say start with the first, which is Yesterday's Echo, because it is a series and things do overlap. However, that's my first novel, and I don't think it's my best. So my favorite is actually Blood Truth, which was number 4, I think.
Okay.
However, when it's, it almost is December, so of course, Blind Vigil is what you should buy. Whatever you're first.
How about, we know which one is yours, Mary.
I was going to say mine's a very easy choice. Derailed, yes.
Derailed. And the next one is next May, right? And that
Yeah,
is
denied. Will be May.
A sense of theme.
It is.
Alan, you have a number of different books with.
I do, but I only have one PI book. So if you like PIs, I'd read I Know Where You Sleep.
I Know Where You Sleep. Okay. Some of your other ones use PI-like techniques, though, I think. Is that
Yeah,
right?
but they're usually, amateur sleuths or.
Okay. Edwin?
I'd start with my first one, which is called Little Comfort. And there are only 2 right now. The second one's called The Missing One. So.
Okay. Okay. Let's see if we have another question here. It's kind of hard to see this. I have to line up my bifocals just right. That's the biggest challenge of doing a virtual panel like this. It's trying to line everything up so you can see. Are there issues with doing hard-boiled cliches?
Must be directed at me. Someone's read me. Yeah, like I said earlier, you don't want to be a cliche, but you don't want to avoid who your guy is too. It's motivation and it's what's going on inside. I think that to put a softer edge on maybe some of the hard-boiled stuff.
Yeah, and as a kind of related question from Toby, and it's, what do you think about Mickey Spillane and of course Mike Hammer?
I actually didn't read much of Mickey Spillane. It's probably been 40 years, so I couldn't remember.
Yeah, I haven't read much of either.
I think maybe the answer is we haven't read much of Mickey Spillane and Mike Hammer, and there must be a reason for that. Different writing styles change over time. Readers' habits and interests change over time.
Well, he's been dead for a long time too.
Yeah, yeah. We're coming right up to our to the close of the panel, and I think it's really been interesting to chat with you guys. I wish we were in a room together. I wish we could go out and have a drink afterwards. Probably could have used one beforehand. I don't know. But it's really been a pleasure being here. I want to thank Edwin and Mary and Matt and Alan for all your insights. And I also want to make a big thank you to all the people out in the audience who listened to this.
Yes, thank you.
Our discussion.
Thank you.
I encourage you folks to visit the websites of each of the authors here on stage or wherever we are. If you can find the website address for each person by looking at the brief biography that's on the panel discussion page on the VoucherCon website. And I encourage you to read the books by all 4 or 5 authors in this panel. And if you do read one in particular, you're not going to sleep very well tonight.
Thank you, JP. This was
Thank
great.
you.
Great
Yeah,
job.
thank you
Thanks,
so
everybody.
Good job, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It was great talking with everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.